I know Astrid Ullens for 10, 15, maybe 20 years. We have met in the context of photography. I remember one specific moment. I made an exhibition, I curated an exhibition for the Mafre Foundation in Madrid. And a third of the loans of this exhibition came from the collection of Astrid Ullens. So I don't remember exactly, maybe 1 year or 2 years ago, she asked me if I would be interested to make an exhibition with her collection or out of her collection. And at that moment she was a bit in contact with Christoph Wiesner from Arles, from the Rencontres Internationales de la Photographie in Arles. He's the director of it. He showed interest, but he wasn't clear if he wants to make a show with this collection. So I agreed to come to Brussels to look into the collection, which actually then I found out wasn't really possible because all the collection was in storage and firmly in storage. So I made an extensive research on the computer. I started to look through the entire collection on the computer. The collection has more than 5,000, maybe 5,500, close to 6,000 photographs today. It was collected over the last 25, 30 years. And I went through it just to get an idea what it is. I mean, I knew it a bit, but I didn't know it enough. So I had really to study those 5,000 photographs of maybe 150 photographers. And the more I got into it, the more I was fascinated by the collection, because it is a unique collection. I don't know of any other collection who is built up like this. What do I mean with that? A lot of collections, not all, but a lot of private collections show the gems, show the jewels. An art collector, a lover of art, purchases when he goes into a gallery, into an exhibition. He tries to take the best piece, the best painting, the best photograph out of it to create a collection. That's quite a normal way how collections start and continue. The collection of Astrid Ullens is completely different. She doesn't buy one photograph, the best photographs. She buys 10 photographs. You could even say she buys minimum 10 photographs, maybe 20, 30, 40, 50. From Paolo Gasparini she has, or from Luc Chesset, the Swiss photographer, she has something like 160 photographs. What does this tell us? She doesn't concentrate on the best photographs, but she purchases the idea of the photographer. She purchases his concept, which is his thinking in photography, which is only possible to read and see when you have a variety of photographs in front of him. So this is this incredible, unique collection showing 10, 20, 30, 40 photographs of each photographer she has purchased. So I looked in that, found this incredible, and started to make sense out of it. There are a variety of different photographers in there and different positions in photography. But I found the strongest part of this collection, and the majority part of this collection, is something I called later then conceptual documentary photography. A documentary photography that doesn't concentrate on one photograph of this accident, but a photography that starts to develop a visual language. And I found a lot of photographers in her collection doing that. And from that point on, I started to create something that I called in the subtitle conceptualized documentary photography, and in the main title I tried to have it in a slightly more poetic way with the title When Images Learn to Speak. The collection has a few earlier works, like an interesting group of workers running to the factory or coming out of the factory by Walker Evans, or a series of women photographed on the streets in a way I've never seen before, because we see them in their thoughts, in their sorrows. There's nothing about women photography that we know from before and after, but it's an incredible series by Harry Callahan. Both of them are done like avant la lettre, that means much, much earlier than the entire movement by Harry Callahan and Walker Evans. The majority of the collection is from 1970s onwards. Maybe the strongest part or the biggest volumes of the collection are between 1970 and 2010. In there, she has incredible convolutes of photographers. She has, from my point of view, of the best photographers in the world, like Bernd and Hilla Becher, Louise Boltz, Larry Sultan and Mike Mandel, Ed Rusché, who isn't a photographer, but he's using photographer, Martha Rossler, Hans-Peter Feldmann, Jim Goldberg, etc. Looking at these groups of photographs, then you see they all are connected, or most of them are connected to something I would like to say in 2-3 sentences: the structural change of looking at art, the linguistification of art in the 60s and 70s. What does this mean? It means that we change the attitude, artists change the attitude of making art, and visitors change the attitude of receiving art. It's no longer about this unique and wonderful image where we stand in front of it and we stare at the image. We look at it and it's this holy grail that we are looking at, and we applaud in our souls to this image. But we understand the image as a visual speech, as an artist speaking to us, speaking with us, speaking about the world. And not having one image, but maybe a row of image, maybe a block of image, maybe a wave of image, maybe an installation of images that make sense, that the content of the images is also represented to the amount of images and to the way it's presented. As the way I'm right now speaking to you, I have an emphasis, I want to explain things. And photography started to do this. We use the word linguification of it, structuralism, where we start to understand the images as a language. And therefore, we don't show one image, but we show a field of images, a cloud of images, a certain row of images, which I actually tried to implement into the exhibition then, to have these very special, different kind of blocks, changing blocks, etc. So this photography could be summarized by the term it's still a documentary photographer. It looks into the world, it documents things, but it's a conceptualized documentary photographer. It wants to tell us more complex realities than before. Now the question was, how can I show this collection in an exhibition? Along what I've just said about the conceptualizing of the documentary photography, creating big groups of photographs about a certain theme, creating a block, creating a field, it was clear. I cannot take one photograph by one photographer out and have 150 photographs of 150 photographers in this exhibition. It would be not just the opposite, it would be wrong. In accordance to what I said, that these works deal with the fact that images learn to speak and images learn to visualize complex situations, I had to create an idea to show these varieties of thinking, to show these attempts to have many images to create a certain context in the work itself to allow us to understand a certain reality much better. So I chose more or less 45 artists, and I chose of each artist quite a group of images. Let's say of Louis Bolt's, maybe 20 images, a certain block he has done. Of Larry Sultan and Mike Mandel, I chose also 15 photographs out of the 50 photographs they made for evidence. So I didn't show, sometimes I could actually show an entire work, sometimes I had to take pieces out because the entire work was so big, but I showed I showed always groups. So I had more or less, with small exceptions, 40 to 45 groups, blocks, lines. And I developed for each photographer, according to the content of it, according to his own working, I developed different way of setting ups of blocks which are slightly disturbed, slightly moving on to. If you have 45 blocks in an exhibition, then the exhibition is frozen. There is no life in it. So I had to find a way to show exactly their thinking, but at the same time to make it alive, to show their individuality in it. That is one part. The other part is that I knew that this exhibition will enter a huge hall, a huge high hall, with walls that are not as high as the walls, so you feel always this big hall. And it was clear for me that this huge space, and in the end, these 45 photographers are represented by something like 650 photographs. It was clear it could not be just in a wide space. So therefore, I chose a system of coloring some of the walls. I didn't color the walls, I always did color the entire body, the entire wall, back and front, and also the side, so that you have bodies of colors in this exhibition. And I used the color circle. So I also wanted to use a language of colors to represent this kind of visual thinking in this exhibition. A central figure in this exhibition is Louis Bolt's. First of all, because the Astrid Ullens collection has a lot of Louis Bolt's. Maybe it's the most fantastic collection of Louis Bolt's in the world that she has. That is a good reason, no? But then Louis Bolt's is also a very central figure in everything I said so far, and I have to add a few things. He is one of the leading figures in this American development to change the entire view how photographers and how, I guess, also the human beings in America looked at the landscape. Sometimes I like to describe it in this way. The photography around 1900 and until Ansel Adams in the 1950s, they went out of the cities and they looked into the countryside. And they were taken sometimes in a natural, religious way by the beauty of the landscape. Actually, nature became a sign of God for the Americans. it's like a natural religion that a lot of people had. What happened in the 60s and 70s is an interesting move. And I try to describe it like that. Instead of imagining these photographers going out of the city and looking into the landscape, you have now photographers, and Louis Boltz is a central figure of that, who goes out of the city but then turns 190 degrees and looks back to the city. And what does he see when he looks back to the city? He sees suburbs, suburbs, growing suburbs, suburbs. The opposite of a natural, holy nature. He sees the meandering, growing cities, the growing industries, growing post-industrial buildings. He made this incredible work on the new industrial parks near Irvine, where he shows all these new architectures, where the architectures are like boxes. And Louis Boltz said to these boxes, they don't tell us anything what is happening inside in these houses. It could be a factory for children toys, and next to it, it could be a factory of Megadeth, of making arms for war. You don't know. The architecture stops to tell you the story, but it's just a box. In this field, Louis Boltz made several works that are just incredible, fantastic, and teaches us a lot to a new way of seeing. When he, for example, photographed the construction of this ski resort called Park City, which we all know from ski racing, or when he photographed a place called St. Quentin Point, where you actually see a corner where there's only rubbish lying around. So he is this very strict and conceptual landscape photographer of today, of the reality today. It's not about dreams, it's not about the past, it's exactly about what is happening now. The same Louis Boltz comes in the exhibition a second time, about in the middle of the exhibition, with three big pieces. We show the maquettes in the exhibition, and they are all 2 meters large, but the real pieces are 12 meter large. They are like cinematic large pieces. And it's the change, I call it sometimes, it's a change when Louis Boltz turns Baudrillard. When he goes one step further, when he leaves his own position of documenting the reality and he enters the field which Jean Baudrillard described as a world where the image dominates reality, where it's no longer that we look at reality, where it's no longer like the procedure that we look at reality, and also because we look at reality, we also think about reality, we also make images about reality, but we enter a world of images which are first and predominant, and the images start to lead our way of thinking about the reality. Louis Boltz, in 1989, with his three major pieces, one is called Docile Bodies, when we delegate our bodies to machine. Another one is called Ronde de Nuit, where he creates a new way of looking at the world, etc. In these three big pieces, wall pieces, he shows us in a very strong way that the image from now on dominates our world. I'm a little proud that I was able to install in the exhibition the work Evidence by Larry Selton and Mike Mandel, next to the work on apartment houses by the famous American painter Ed Ruscha. And I think it's maybe interesting if I explain why I'm proud. I think it might be the first time that these two works were somewhere shown together. And it makes, in a good way, it's interesting to show them together. Larry Selton and Mike Mandel, who worked in the 70s together, later on they separated, made an interesting work under the title of Evidence that we gain through photographs and evidence about a certain situation, with an interesting approach. They went through many archives of many institutions and companies in the US. I think there were in more than 50, 60, 70s archives of different companies or institutions, universities, corporations, etc. And they looked through the archive. So they looked, what you want, so through useful photography. So photography that was done because some scientists made a research, and while they did the research, they photographed these situations. They took in the end, I don't know, I can't remember exactly, but 50 to 60 photographs out of this context of these archives, and started then to treat them like very holy, artful pieces, making a book out of this, with utmost care, an expensive printed book, as if this is the Holy Grail that we see in it. So what they do, they change useful photography in art photography, by doing that, they irritate our way of looking at it. They irritate our reception of it. We don't know what are we looking at. And because we don't know what are we looking at, and because we are still curious people, we start to debate about what we are seeing. That is one side. The other side is Ed Ruscha's apartment house photographs, which usually in the 60s were only, again, like Larry Selton and Mike Mandel's Evidence, appeared only in small booklets and not as prints. Only later on, Ed Ruscha made prints of some of these series. And one of the series, this apartment house series, is in the collection of Astrid Ullens. And he photographs with no intention of making art. He does it, as he calls it, as laconic as possible. He photographs one apartment house after the other, while you drive with the car through the streets, and you photograph them as amateurish as possible. It is not art. It is a document. It is a useful product to talk about the world, but it is not art. So we have, and that's done late 60s. So around late 60s, early 70s, we have with these two positions, two big question marks to re-question the use of photography today, to debate how we have used it in the history and how we should use it today, when images start to play more and more a central role in our lives. In the middle of the exhibition, we show an interesting group of color photographs. I expressively make it so clear because a lot of the exhibition is black and white, by the American artist Martha Rosler. The work that we show is called Photo Op, Bringing the War Home, House Beautiful New Series. Before I talk about the title and about what is in there, I enter this new series. She did a series in the late 60s, early 70s called Bringing the War Home, House Beautiful, where she worked on the fact that in the US, the normal life was continuing While in Vietnam, during the Vietnam War, there was this huge disaster. A big army of young American men were in Vietnam and were dying. And the two worlds were incredibly separated by the continent. It's just the other side of the continent. So you could live your normal life in the US, your normal bourgeois life with your house in the suburbs, overlooking a countryside, while you know that the son of the neighbor died last week in the Vietnam War. And what she did in the late 60s, early 70s, she did in a clear collage with cutting things together. She cutted images of the two realities and brought them together. She juxtaposed them to mix them so that you, instead of looking out of the window into the countryside, you looked into a slaughter field. That was her first series. After the experience of the Second Gulf War, and maybe also because of the experience of 9/11, she did a new series. And this time it's digitally, it's an early digitally work where she juxtaposed again the war and the bourgeois life, but in 2004 when she made the series. So in one of the image, you see in the back of the image, you see tanks, you see bombing, war, and you see actually on a certain sofa, photo, you see two female bodies. You don't know if they're still alive or if they're dead. While in the front, you have a young, beautiful blonde girl that appears like a Twitter, like in twos, and they show themselves into a mobile phone and they look how they appear in the mobile phone. So the two girls live completely for the reproduction of their own image online to produce themselves as beautiful blonde girls, while the Second Gulf War is happening, while the war finally actually entered the US. The shock of the US through 9/11 cannot be bigger, because since the civil war they had in the 1860s, for over 140 years, they had never war on their own ground. They had often war, unfortunately, or on purpose, but not on their own land, but somewhere else in the world. So in this situation, she makes the same. She brings it together and makes different collages, digitally collage, very strong collages, very shocking collages to make people aware that we have to think these two realities together, because only one of them is not correct. It's not the real reality that we are living in. This year, 2024, I think in February, Hans-Peter Feldmann unfortunately died at the age of 82. I knew him because I was able to make a big show when I was still working as a curator and director of the Photo Museum Winter Tour. We made, I think, a wonderful show with him, and we had a great time. And I always loved his approach, and he started very early in the 70s and had a lot of interesting work with found footage, things, photography he found, or very daily things he photographed. He photographed with a simple camera, and then he brought the film to the drugstore to develop it and to tell them to make 9 by 13 or 9 by 50 centimeter prints. That's the opposite of what we know from photography, that you have here your incredible lab where you make your outstanding prints. Feldmann was never about prints. Feldmann was always about looking at the world and then reproducing images and using those images. In often he also uses found footage. Sometimes he produces it. In the series we have in this exhibition, and which is in the collection, it shows 101 portraits of people. Actually, it's all people around Hans-Peter Feldmann. Friends, family, surroundings. So it's his area he moves in where he lived. And he made this work in 2000. The 101 portraits means that the youngest person in this series is a newborn baby in this year, like 4 weeks earlier born. The oldest person, actually it's a woman, is 100 years old. So the baby is 0 years, and then is 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4, etc. It shows the entire 20th century from 1900 to 2000. We see the century along 101 person who lived in that century, or the baby will basically is born at the end and will be living in the 21st century. It's a series which he did with quite unusual care, but at the same time very simple. He photographed the people where they are, in their house, in their office, in their foregarden, in black and white, precise, simple but precisely framed, to give a portrait of the 20th century in a very simple way. Now, the interesting part is how we react to this series. And I can tell you that every person who looks at the series, and we show it slightly different than Hans-Peter Feldmann usually shows it. He shows it in one room, these 100 portraits. We didn't have the space for it, and I wanted to show it within the context of the exhibition in a more attractive way. But he shows it in a line, and you follow and you get closer to the portraits that have the same age than you have. And then you get a bit unquiet. You start to compare. How do they look? Do I also look like them? They look a bit old. Why am I actually also looking that old? So he makes, for every age that looks at this exhibition, everyone goes very strictly and very soon to this reference point. It's a beautiful, also psychologically beautiful and simple piece of Hans-Peter Feldmann. The second, it's a huge portrait piece, no? The second huge portrait piece in the exhibition is by Nicholas Nixon. He photographed the series. What he photographs is called the Brown Sisters. One of those 4 sisters he photographs is his wife, and he photographs these 4 sisters for the last 48 years. So what you find there is actually 48 portraits of these 4 sisters standing in front of the camera. So you follow their life. It's not 48 different people like in Hans-Peter Feldmann, but it's 48 times the same 4 sisters. During the COVID crisis, they weren't able to meet. So there you have actually one photograph with 4 online images he did from the screens. It's a very, very touching series where you follow what we are born, we are raised, we grow, we are getting older, and you follow the way these 4 sisters getting older step by step, year by year. And suddenly one of the sisters looks much, much older, and then another one much, much younger. And 5 years later, this much, much younger one starts to grow faster old than the other ones. It's an incredible, simple, but at the same time very deep representation of life, of our life. I spoke several times now already about the term language. images turning into a language, understood as a sentence, as a paragraph of writing. So therefore we talk about visual speech or visual language. There are 2 or 3 works where this is more and in a different way exemplified. There is a work by I guess it's not a work, but it's out of the work of Jim Goldberg, who over the last 20 years made it to 20, 30 years maybe, made it to a speciality of him, that he makes what we would call today an inclusive portrait. What can be an inclusive portrait? A portrait is always a photographer, a male or female or whatever photographer, and on the other side is someone who is taken the picture of. There is a portrait made by this person. So there is a direction. But Jim Goldberg uses a trick, and it's not a cheap trick, it's a sincere idea to say, I photograph you, but you have the right, when you see the portrait of yours, to react on this. So he made a lot of images where he portraits around the world people, and then people get a print of them and they start to write on the print. They comment on the photograph. They add a story that is important for them. Sometimes they even write into the photograph, not just on the white border of the photograph. So here we have, in a very interesting and intense way, sometimes also aggressive way, we have the dialogue of image and language, and photographer and the person who is being taken the portrait of, who starts also to act into the piece. So we showed in this exhibition 10 of these photographs which are in the collection of Astrid Ullens. On the other side, a bit away from that, we have a work that also deals with language. It's an artist, Moira Davey from the US, who always works with photography and language. And here, in an interesting way, she photographs, I can't remember exactly, maybe 25, I think it's 25 photographs in the subway, the New York subway. And she only portraits people who are writing in the subway, who are writing or reading in the subway. So she takes picture of exercise of language. And then when she makes small posters of them, and so when an institution wants to show these photographs, she folds these photographs and writes then on a post-it the address on it. So language enters again onto the image, and she sends it to the place. You could say she could have sent it directly from New York to Arles, that it's being shown there. So we have 2 interesting ways of directly dealing with the fact that photography and language overlap in many, many ways. We also show in this exhibition a series by Mitch Epstein called The American Power. And we show, I think, something like 25 images, smallish sized, 40 by 60 centimeters. I say this because the series also exists, at least part of the series also exists like big pieces, wall pieces, 120 by 150 large. Here we show the entire series. This term, American Power, is an interesting, slightly disturbing title if you just hear the title. You could think of, we talk about the grand US, the power of the US nation, the power of the US economy, the power of the US army, the power of the US universities, which are the 7 best from the world, etc. So you could say it's a series, when you only hear the name, about a success story. Yes, it is a little bit about a success story, but a very hypocrite one. It is a work about oil, about coal, about gas, also about electricity, but about all the sources of energy we take out of our ground and use it. And he photographed it in 2003 to 2008. He traveled to the United States and made these photographs. And what he is himself shocked of, that today, 20 years later, nothing has changed. We do exactly the same. We extract oil, we extract coal, we extract gas, and we even burn coal to create electricity, etc. So we seem not to have learned that this writes us into the completely wrong direction. This writes us into the disaster of the world. He told himself that he is shocked about the fact that it hasn't changed anything at all. I like to finish off this remark, I like to quote him, what he said about a small sentence about what he himself said about this series. He said, he finishes off a quote with, American power is an active response to the American dream gone haywire. So we have this American dream, this idea you can, if you put in enough energy, in America, every single person can reach the maximum, become rich and wealthy, etc. Of course, it was always a lie, but it was a dream. And now we have this American power which shows the backside, the dark side of this dream. If we talk about Italian photography today and over the last 1 or 2 decades, then very soon the name Luigi Ghirri is mentioned. Luigi Ghirri seems to be in the field of conceptualized art photography, be the thing of Italy. And that's correct. But it's correct, but it's not sufficiently correct. It misses out a second person, and that's Guido Guidi, who is still alive, who had more or less the same age than Luigi Ghirri, but Luigi Ghirri died very early. He was not even 50 years old when he died in the 90s. Guido Guidi is still alive. He lives in Cesena, in the Romagna, part of Emilia-Romagna. And whenever I visit him there, and it's wonderful to visit him and to talk with him, then I'm never alone. Because Guido Guidi is surrounded by a family of friends. Whenever I'm there, there are 4 or 5 other photographers there. They are from the area, but they can also be from Sweden. Gary Johansson is visiting him. A lot of photographers visiting him. Guido Guidi is right now alive, the photographer of photographers. And he also created maybe a certain language of Italian photography, if you want so, or of people who love the way he is looking at the world, which I like to describe in a short way. He published a book a couple of years ago, which has the title Veramente. It's about this, how you look at the world and what you see there. Does it exist really? Does it exist veramente? You can say, yes, veramente, it exists. But you can also make a question mark. Veramente? Are you sure that it exists? Are you sure that it exists in this way? So you can use this term veramente as a language term to describe a different way of looking at the world and photographing the world. and showing elements of the world that create in the end a certain documentary language. Guido Guidi's work is full of that. He has an incredible archive. He lives in this small country house with 2 floors where the upper floor is full of 10,000s of negatives and positives. I'm super happy to see that he is now, I think, 85 years old, that he is now really discovered. Michael Mack is publishing book after book, and this autumn in 2024, I think on the 12th of December, there will opening up at the Maxi in Rome a big exhibition of him. And I'm super happy for him and for the photo-based world that this is going to happen, because he earns it a lot. Looking at the landscape of war, like Joe Radcliffe does it over and over in South Africa, in Angola, in Namibia, where she goes, sometimes alone, sometimes with soldiers, into areas where they have incredible wars, incredible fightings, incredible killings. But soon after an incredible war, the war gets forgotten. People try to take it out of their heads and start a new, maybe strange life, which gets step by step normal. And there is a huge silence about the war. And Joe Radcliffe goes back to discover signs in the landscape. The landscape seems to be then the place where you can rediscover the war. You can rediscover signs of war. You can, when you start to dig, you will find dead bodies which were covered, and we didn't know that they were killed there. So Joe Radcliffe's work, and we show out of 3 series, quite a bit of that series follows the traces of the landscape. When you look, you have to finish. You look at a normal landscape, to the savanna, to the desert, etc. In the end, you look at a war landscape that has a lot of signs talking about the war. That is visible in the work of Joe Radcliffe. In the exhibition, we show quite a bit of Latin American photographers. Of course, the famous Manuel Álvarez Bravo, Graciela Uturbide, but also Sergio Trujillo, Facundo di Zuviria, Pablo López Luz, and many others. What they have in common in this exhibition, and maybe they also have it in common generally very often, is that they photograph not the landscape, but they photograph facades, blinds of shops, or walls. And as Joe Radcliffe looks at the landscape and tries to find the traces of a certain historical event, they look at facades as house facades, walls, blinds, and they look for the traces on these blinds. It's the walls, the facades, the blinds are like canvas. There is things written on it. For example, all these photographs of closed blinds in the afternoon when all the shops are closed end up to be like canvases where there's a lot of writing of spraying on it and tells a lot about the history of this place. Or Pablo López Luz shows facades of houses where you see that the construction model for the houses was taken from earlier cultures. So in Joe Radcliffe's works and in the works of these Latin American photographers in the exhibition, you see this reading of language in language photography or in architectural photography, in houses, blinds and facades. Looking at this exhibition, now, but also while I was conceptualizing, developing the exhibition and working on it and thinking about it, I was asking myself a question. Is this generation over, it's a big generation, it's like two generations, but between 1970 and let's say 2010, is this the last generation of photographers who really try to look at to find through their way of looking, of conceptualizing, of creating it into a network of images, into sentences, into fields, as I said before, to look for visual truths, to find what photography always wanted, to show reality, and by the way you show reality, to show a certain visual truth. If we look at how photography is used today, I mean, we have this incredible victory of photography online. If photography was done 200 million times per year before the digital age, now it's maybe 3 or 4 billion times that photography is used. We don't stand in front of a huge image that is so immersive that we want to walk in this image and combine our body with this big image, but we have all the photographs are 4 by 5, 5 by 6, 5 by 8, 9 centimeters, the size of our iPhones, of our mobile phones. So the way we look at photography, the size of the photographs has so dramatically changed that we look something like a traffic sign on our mobile phone. And we scroll in an incredible speed through it. And sometimes maybe we stop. Sometimes if something is really black, really beautiful, we only stop when something is extreme. This doesn't look and sound like a search for visual truth anymore. It seems to be like a second reality, the image reality turning into the first reality. We live in this image reality, and the image reality starts to dominate our way of acting, but maybe we lose any interest or any try to find truth in this. When I look at photography that was found in the first part of the 19th century, then we also know that this was a time of positivism, a philosophical thinking that you can actually find truth in the way you see reality. You are, at that time, the conviction was strong that we can only understand and find truth through precisely looking at our realities. Photography was kind of the technical and technological instrument for that, but it was also a way of thinking. And I think neither the positivism still exists, nor the searching for visual truths. We are entering in a world where we float from one image field to another, and maybe we relate from one image to another, but we don't connect it back to reality. So it feels for me like a colorful world, a fancy world, but it feels for me that we enter through that in a world where we are permanently slightly confused. We don't have these posts anymore where I can hold my hand and I know I am here right now. I think we are all entering a time where we all float, confused, don't know exactly where we are. What does AI, artificial intelligence, actually do? It does a lot, but what does it do to photography? Because we have AI for AI imagery today, which has no mark that is AI, so we don't know if it is a photograph or an AI image. We mix these two fields. That means that we can no longer trust any image, that it really has happened somewhere, that it was made in a real situation where something has happened and the photograph has also happened. So we are losing this trust, and that leads for me to a feeling of confusion. And I fear that confusion will be for the next, I don't know, 1 or 2 generations, a dominant feeling which cannot really cope with the search and the need to find some truth.